Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. This is the first of our Tuesday tune-ups. This is going to be a series of 6 training webinars to help folks feel encouraged and empowered with the resources they need to be successful in our upcoming Give a Hoot Community Giving Challenge. And while we are going to be focusing on examples that are specific to Give a Hoot, my hope is that the tools that you learn are going to be helpful for any kind of a fundraising or outreach campaign that you have. Because it can be a little unwieldy with this many people on a conference call, rather than having folks go around and introduce themselves, we ask you to introduce yourself by typing into the chat box your name and what organization you're with, just so we have a sense of who's in the room. You can also do a chat individually to me personally. You can, in the chat box, you can either chat to everyone or to just a single person. So we also I want to just make sure you're familiar with the chat box so you can reach out with any questions that you might have. We are going to have our special guest presenter, and then I have a few things that I'm going to share, and then we'll have some times for question and answer. Our model here, being respectful of the fact that we're all maybe have been on a lot of Zoom meetings as late, and it can be a little hard to stay focused. We're going to try to get in and out in 45 minutes. So this is an experiment. Let's see how that goes. And with that, I would like to introduce today's special guest is Christel Chvilicek. Christel, feel free to correct me if I'm mispronouncing. I had the privilege of hearing Christel speak when she was a guest presenter for the Bozeman Area Community Foundation, and I was very inspired by what she had to share, and that was just leading up to the Bozeman area's Give Big Gallatin Valley, and I was very inspired by the success that our neighboring nonprofits had during Give Big. So I reached out and asked if she would do us the favor of joining us for our first planning session. And so I'm very glad to have her here. Christel has done fundraising work for a variety of organizations. She is a certified fundraising professional, of which I think there may be 3 in Montana, 3 or 4. So she's really gone the extra mile to develop her skills and abilities, and she currently serves as executive director at Family Promise of Gallatin Valley. So Christel, thank you so much for being with us, and I'm gonna let you take it away.
Awesome. Well, I wanted you guys to see my face, and then I am actually going to shut off my camera here just in case we lose some internet. I know here in our building, we live in an older building, it slows us down. So I'll be seeing you, but I'm going to shut mine off here. Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me. I am what they say, a fundraising nerd. I've been doing it for over 13 years, and I'm always looking for those people that have that same calling or ways to help people that love fundraising in itself. I'm gonna see if So I thought we'd start off kind of big picture here. You know, a lot of people have seen this, whether you look at the glass half empty, half full, but I think it's important to kind of relate that to perception. There is a lot of stuff happening in our world. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's people that are stressed. And in reality, the big conversation that I was hearing in Gallatin County or in the Bozeman area was, we should stop fundraising, or how are people going to give us money? They don't have money to give. And kind of a lot of hysteria around that. And so that's where kind of this presentation comes into play, is really that's a perception that was had by a lot of people in Bozeman, and I'm sure it's trickling out to other people here in the United States, or even in Park County where you guys are located. But with perception, I think it's important to know that perception begins when a human brain receives data from your 5 senses. And so there's a lot of data coming at us. We're seeing it in all different facets, and that it begins to put a lens over what is reality. and you start to lose that perception, or that perception starts to influence how you process things, how you remember, how you interpret, how you understand, and eventually perception can become reality. And that's what I'm hoping that I can kind of conquer today in this training, is that we don't want this perception that it's a bad time to fundraise, because in reality, it's a good time to fundraise is how I'm going to say it. You know, I'm about data, and there's been some data being done recently because there's fears that, you know, we're going into another recession. And so there is a gentleman by the name of Ben Miller. He is the Chief Analytic Officer of Donor Trends. So this is what he does. He looks at donations and trends. And he looked at the period right before the recession and then past the recession. And in reality, the S&P 500 index, it dropped 39% when the recession hit. But during that recession point, foundations and, you know, nonprofits and those, they actually saw a slight increase in donations to their nonprofits. Overall, if you look at this 2-month period, yes, there was that 39% in the, you know, the stock market, and there was only an 8% decrease at the end of the recession. So I hope that helps you guys realize that, you know, past data, what we've seen is nonprofits don't get hit too hard. So this is kind of the fun part. So the conversation I wanted to start around were some myths that I've been hearing from people that are in nonprofit world or that are fundraising. And I decided that a great way to do this is how can we bust those myths through actually information or techniques to help with our fundraising. So I'm going to go over 10 of those. Feel free to ask questions. I might pause after every slide. You know, you could take yourself off mute if you want to. I'll pay attention to that. Maybe send a chat question and we can kind of monitor that. But the first one I wanted to talk about is now the right time to fundraising, right? That's the big one. And I'm going to tell you that your donors are going to be way happier to hear from you now than they've ever been. They are at home. Their lives have slowed down. They've been forced to pull apart from, you know, several of their normal communities, and they are craving that attention, right? They are wanting someone to talk to. And so I actually say, you know, with proof from what we've seen is that it's the best time to reach out to them. And when you reach out to these donors, being very candid about, you know, not diving into fundraising, but asking them, how are they? How are you feeling about what's happening in the world? Those typical questions lead into a broader conversation where then you can kind of describe some of the things that you're experiencing. And, you know, fundraising is all about the relationship. And I think it's so important to know that just through this conversation, you don't know the power of that conversation and the effects that it could make in the near future for your donations or the support of your organization. The second one that I wanted to dive into is I can't fundraise right now. I'm not directly responding to the pandemic. So this is one we've heard a lot in Bozeman. Really, the straight point to it is if your organization served an important need in the past, it still serves an important need even during these difficult, you know, unknown times. You know, people are, you know, I've heard, well, I don't serve a critical need right now. I'm not a healthcare worker, or I'm not providing food or housing. But I'm encouraging you guys not to fall into that trap of thinking that you matter less. In fact, you know, this is a great opportunity to take some time and reconsider what your relevance is and the importance of your information or of your organization, and maybe developing some new messaging so that you can share that with these donors on that downtime. You know, this is like personally me speaking from the heart, you know, working as the executive director at Family Promise, we're considered a frontline worker. And, you know, we've seen some positive, you know, donation increases to us. But I really want to say that for me personally, there's not that fear that you're going to take away from us. We provide shelter for families that are struggling with homelessness. But it's more than just shelter. We are looking holistically on all different levels. And so that includes going to the local museums, doing art therapy, connecting children to disability services, the sky's the limit with all these different services that we're providing. And so we need you guys as another nonprofit. And so I'm encouraging you to keep getting out there and keep fundraising. Our number 3 myth that I was trying to bust is people don't have as much money to give. This is a big one for me. While it's true that the stock market's kind of in turmoil and the economy is more uncertain than any time in recent history, it's not true that people don't have money to give. There are people that are in retirement age. They keep having a consistent income from their Social Security and their retirement funds. You know, I've talked to several people that are making more unemployment with that $600 extra check than I've ever, you know, or even talking with them, they're making more than they ever have. So there's an opportunity to seek some donations from them. And also people are staying home. So there's not those added expenses of eating at restaurants, you know, working on their cars or gas money, movie theater tickets. That list can go on and on and on. But I think it's important to know that their expenses are down as well. I do want to encourage you, not all donors are in a great place to give. And so that's why I would encourage you to take some time right now to segment your database. So looking at who your donors are, where do they fall? Do they fall into that higher age group? Do they, you know, just kind of looking at some data trends in their age and their demographics and kind of working on some different segmenting tools so that you can be respectful and target some of those individuals. This one's kind of the fun one and scary one. You know, we have dove into some campaigns actually in the middle of this crisis with COVID-19. We have done a few things. The first one is the stimulus checks. You know, you think of all these families that fall within the guidelines of receiving that stimulus check. A lot of them still have jobs, so this is extra money to them. And so we actually did a mini campaign that basically said, are you eligible for a stimulus check, but not relying upon it? Then consider donating it to Family Promise. So that's another way that you could look at your donor databases, is who falls into that category of people that may not need that stimulus check. Another group that we looked at were the donor advised funds, as we've been, you know, in the middle of this pandemic. These donor advised funds are typically allocated at the very beginning of the year. So these are funds that have already been set aside for use, and this isn't affecting those as much. And so figuring out who in your database, once again, might have donor advised funds and having those conversations, or even doing a mini campaign around that as well. The third group that you could kind of currently look at as well is foundations. So most foundations, they work on a rolling average of the past 12 quarters. That's kind of how they figure out how much money they're going to give to people. So you won't see a decline in their giving in the short term, and you might actually see where foundations will be increasing their giving to help with this crisis. When you're talking with those foundations, I encourage you to ask for operations. The conversations I've had with foundations, they understand. They understand that you're having trouble maybe paying your employees or those kinds of things. And these foundations they're more on top of it and ready to help. And it's just about what you need to ask them for. You could even go to, one thing to kind of make note of, you could even go to a foundation maybe that you have originally got a grant for to provide a specific service. And because of everything that's happened, maybe that isn't happening, but you could go back to that foundation and say, hey, can we talk about readjusting these funds so that we can use it for a bigger need that occurred right now. I was gonna check if we had any questions in the chat box. I don't think so. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next slide.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the chat, Christel. No questions so far, but folks, just, you know, feel free to include your questions there, and we look forward to answering them.
Perfect. Okay, so my fourth myth that I would like to bust today is people don't care about my mission right now. This quote here is so on point. It talks about where your passion meets your compassion, and that's really how I feel donors give. The reality of the situation is you can't change someone's passion. If someone loves dogs and they want to save all the dogs in the world, you can't change that out of them. They may, in the short term, give a little bit of money to like an immediate now, but if you keep communicating with them and you keep talking with them, that support will eventually come back to you, because just with that simple point is you can't change their passion. And we all know it. People give to causes that matter to them. And I know we're in this pandemic, but I don't think that will change for the long term. Number 5, this is a big one. So my message won't make it in front of COVID-19 headlines. I just think this is interesting. You know, we're sitting in, a lot of us are online all the time. We're trying to interact, we're doing Zoom meetings, we're talking with people on FaceTime. And there are so many things right now that are where we're experiencing negativity and just everything involved with COVID-19, deaths and shutting down, and it can kind of get exhausting. It's important, but can kind of be exhausting. And so I'm going to challenge you guys with some things. This is a time right now where we need to be really creative with our communication and a time to be bold. Some things to think about when you're doing your communication with your donors is be transparent. Let your followers and your supporters know how this virus is affecting you. If you know that you only have enough money to help these children in your program for the next 2 months, share that. Be vulnerable, share your worries. The worries I think a lot of us are is, how long is my nonprofit going to be in business? Can I keep paying staff? So being very vulnerable with your donors. The third one is to humanize your approach. We've all seen it. Jimmy Kimmel is doing the late night shows from his house. His kids are interrupting him. You know, do the same thing with your appeals and your communication to your donors. They know that several people are working from home, teaching their kids. You know, use that. Show your empty building. Maybe walk around the halls of your empty building and say that, you know, I hope in 2 months these halls will be filled again, and we can't do that without your support. But I think the big one is to be fun and unique, because our world is filled with all sorts of emotions, and, you know, including fear and sadness and anger. And it's a good time to flood those inboxes with, you know, happiness and what's missing out without your, you know, nonprofit being able to serve. I love these examples. These are just some examples that I wanted to pull out. They couldn't speak more true. So the first initial 30 days of this, you know, shutdown, when most of the world went into sheltering in place, the internet usage was pushed up 70%. So these are the first figures. I'm sure that's even more now because we're in month 2, month 3 of this. But these little advertisements speak so true. So COVID-19 is here, and so is kitten season. I mean, it's the truth of the matter. Just because it's here, it doesn't mean kittens aren't being born. We had some amazing, I think you guys have probably seen this one, but the Georgia Aquarium and the Atlanta Humane Society, they paired up for some like PR and communication, where they had these dogs that were adoptable dogs walking through the empty aquarium. And so they were able to find a partner to work together, to be creative and shed the light on both of their needs at the same time. So those are just some of those fun examples there. Number 6, I think this is another good one. I'm not going to waste time and money on a mail campaign right now. You know, people are stuck at home and they are centered around all this online media. So I really think right now the power of a personal letter or mail appeal coming to their inbox could be very powering, making it look not like it's a generated one that everybody's getting, but maybe actually personalizing the outside of the envelope, putting a special stamp on it, those kinds of things. And if you recall, what I was talking about earlier was a lot of the people that have money to give are that older generation, and they don't use Instagram and Facebook as much. They do use it, but this is a really nice way to get in front of them and change it up from what they've been seeing day to day. So this is a big one. If you've been in the nonprofit world, I have probably experienced this 3 or 4 times in the last 13 years, where things start to get tough. And the first thing that wants to happen with your board is that maybe we should cut our fundraising and marketing budget. I just want to say, I hope you don't get encountered with, you know, have to encounter that. But this is just a knee-jerk reaction when money gets tight. And it's basically saying if we have to drive across the country, we are not going to put any more gas in the tank. So I think it's just something that happens more than it should. But I thought some data would be interesting to you. So when we had this financial crisis of 2008, there were a whole bunch of organizations that reduced their fundraising budgets and they eliminated their fundraising staff in an effort to save more money. Those are the nonprofits who suffered the most and in the long run even closed their doors. So then there's data looked at with the ones that stayed the course, they invested in their fundraising efforts, and those are the organizations that really rose above that financial crisis and were able to serve more people and provide a much higher need because they stayed the course. So something to do with this is, a recession could be a convenient time to let go of staff or programs you haven't had the guts to let go of before, but don't stop there. I really want you to look at the right people for the right positions to get the best results in that fundraising department. And also looking at the money to make it happen, because you can't, I say this a lot, but you can't make money unless you have money to spend. This is an interesting one. So number 8 is we should cancel our capital campaign. I can speak really candidly on this one. We are in the middle of a quiet capital campaign here at Family Promise. This is one of the first things we said, should we stop what we're doing? And my answer was no, we should not. After 9/11, it took 2 months for major donors to give gifts again. So with this information, I would suggest that maybe consider postponing your bigger gift solicitations for a few months past what we're experiencing. Be transparent with the current people that you've been soliciting or the current people that have made donations. Share with them any adjusted plans that you have for the campaign. But it's really important to stay flexible too, because we don't know how long this is going to last, and we don't know the exact repercussions or of what's going to happen. So just letting everybody know that we need to stay flexible, stay the course as much as possible, but keep moving forward with that capital campaign through that communication. And the last point I just noticed here too was when you're in these capital campaigns, focus more on pledged giving rather than actually getting the gifts. And then talking to your donors that have gifts of stock to actually give you those gifts when the stock market hits a high again. So having those very candid, genuine conversations with donors. So number 9 is I shouldn't be optimistic about fundraising. It's really, really easy to let fear and the unknown paralyze us. But data and past again shows that the top fundraisers are some of the most optimistic people on the planet. They see a possibility and they're willing to take risks and new approaches, and usually that risk pays off. And they're the ones that are raising the most funds to change the world. So I know fear and worry is natural, but just don't let it consume you. And I do have a challenge here. If you are at that point where all this unknown and all this uncertainty is consuming you and you're starting to feel fearful, I would get a list of the people who have donated in the last 12 months and start what I call a thankathon. Recruit volunteers to do this with you, have your board members participate, do it yourself, get on the phone and literally say, I'm not calling to ask you for a gift. I'm just calling to thank you for your support. And from my experience, when you do these thankathon calls, you learn so much from the donor. You open up a very candid conversation of why they are, tied to your organization. And they will remember this call for a long time, that it will eventually lead to a gift in the near future. The last barrier that I would say that I would want to bust through here is I need to stop apologizing to my donors for asking. It can be very tempting to stop asking. We think we're being nice because there's so much other stuff happening in the world, and by giving them the space, but we're truly not. There's nothing compassionate about not asking. For many donors, it's a way that you feel human. It's a way that you connect to people is by giving. And so ask. You know, I will say though, your ask will be different. Let's see, there's some data done that it used to take 6 to 7 attempts to reach a donor and have that donor actually connect back to you, whereas most people stop after the second time. But we are already starting to see that it's taking 10 to 12 touches for that donor to acknowledge us. And so avoid that temptation to make that, so knowing that you've went from 6 to 7 to 10 to 12, avoid that temptation to make the decision for the donor that they don't want to hear from you. Be patient. You have no idea if a donor will give until they tell you otherwise. Now, if you do get to that 10 or 12 and they come back and they say, no, we're not interested in helping, I always say, turn a no into something. Is that no because you're supporting another cause right now? Is that no because you've already given your giving for the year? Is that no for another 6 months, but I can come back and talk to you? I always encourage that a no just can't be a no. You need to figure out something else to move forward with it. Okay, Barb, I think you are up with that. I have a couple more slides, but I was going to give you the floor.
Yes, I had some information that I was going to be sharing, but does anyone have questions for Christel before we shift gears slightly? Okay, let's see. So I want to share my screen. Let's see how this is going to look. Okay. So Christel, what it tells me is that if I share my screen, it's going to take away your screen. So I'm going to continue and give me just a second. Okay, I think that's what I want to share. Yeah, that was not what I wanted to share. So let's try this another way. Okay. How about this? View full screen. Okay. Can you all see a document that says planning your next fundraising campaign?
Yes.
Terrific. Thank you, Gavin. So this is just a planning tool that I made up that I am hoping will be useful to folks. I personally am a big fan of lists and checklists, and if you are too, then hopefully this will be useful to you. I will be going ahead and sending this out as a follow-up to this webinar, and also I'll be posting a copy of this on the nonprofit toolkit page of giveahoot.org. So don't feel like you have to write down all the information that's in here. I just wanted to take a few minutes and give you kind of a guided tour of what I did here. So I created these 3 different columns, the things that I personally have found to be tools for success in a fundraising campaign, a middle column of looking at, is this already available to you? And then the third column over here, what are your options for obtaining this resource? Just to start off with the first 2 examples, one of the things that I find very successful is to have a designated theme or promotional strategy. And one of the things we heard a lot when we did the debrief of Give a Hoot last year is that folks really appreciated that we were creating that theme and that giving strategy. So in this instance, that's why I have the third column here blocked out, because you don't need an option for obtaining that resource. That resource is already at hand. Similarly, having a campaign timeline can be extremely successful. And with the Give a Hoot campaign, we do have that clear time frame. So no additional resource needed there. And then what I moved on to do here is to include some additional things that I think are helpful tools, a positive attitude. Thank you, Christel, for sharing your presentation. And when Christel gets to her end of her presentation, she's going to be mentioning that she'll welcome your follow-up questions. So I included that information here. Visibility to new donors is an important tool for success, and there's things that we're going to be providing as a community foundation as part of our overall Give a Hoot marketing. So listing on the brochure and also your information on the organizational profile. So those are ways that your organization can get in front of potential new donors. I just put a little note here about reminding you of the deadline to be registered so we can make sure that you are listed on that brochure. And I also, I mentioned at the beginning that Christel's presentation is the first of 6 different Tuesday tune-ups we're going to be doing. So if there was a tool that I'm mentioning, and if there is in fact a Tuesday tune-up that is addressing that tool, I did put that information in there. Methods for, so let me just take a step back. So these are, one tool for success is visibility to new donors. Another tool that I find to be very successful for fundraising is methods for contacting previous donors and supporters, and doing that either through email, print mail, or social media. And the next few pages of this document are going to cover some suggestions for that. And then the final piece is the people powered to implement those plans, both leading up to the Give a Hoot campaign, so you have time to get organized, and then also during the campaign. And this can be either existing organizational staff. I realize some of you are staff / volunteers, and it can also be engaged and reliable volunteers. So that's just page 1. I do want to leave time for Christel to finish up and answer questions, so I'm going to go through the next 2 pages very quickly. We have so page 2, email tools, the different types of email tools that are going to be helpful for you. Just to point out, in terms of having some messaging about what to say in your email and why you're asking at this time, that we do have quite a few resources available in the toolkit on giveahoot.org. There's a whole document on email templates, and we will be talking more on June 9th about impactful communication strategies. Print mail tools, we don't talk a lot about print mail in our toolkits, but you can definitely repurpose some of the messaging around email templates and website updates. And again, that's something we're going to be talking about. An important question to think about of print mail is both the cost of mailing and also the time that it's going to take to get this done so it gets out to your donors with enough time. And another thing to consider with print mail is what you can do to help tie your fundraising campaign into the larger Give a Hoot campaign. And again, just to point out that we do have logos available on the giveahoot.org website, and we'll also be, logos will help. While logos are helpful, photos, of course, are also very helpful, and we're going to be having a session on making compelling photos from your smartphone. And then just on the 3rd page, to point out a few additional trainings we're going to be having to help around online communication and social media messaging. We're going to have a social media made easy training that'll be next Tuesday. Again, the compelling photos, and then we're also going to be doing a video training. So just this is a quick overview of some of the things that I have really found to be the tools for success for a fundraising campaign. And the question I would put forth to you is, which of these does your organization already have in place? And then which of them will it be feasible for you to get into place by July 1st? So I will be sending this out to participants and also posting it on the giveahoot.org website in the nonprofit toolkit section. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I invite Christel to come back with your last 2 slides. Great.
Okay.
Thank you,
Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So cool. So I feel like I've gone through quite a bit of information today, but I always like to walk away with some homework or take-home assignments or whatever you want to call them. So I encourage you, so number 1 is to become a myth buster. I sat here and I went through 10 myths that I've heard and how I think that they are, false in perspective and data that we've had. So I would encourage you to list some of the myths that you're feeling or the perceptions that you're hearing, throw them away and think how you can communicate and eliminate those thoughts And then I would love to hear them. I know we're not too far away from each other, but I'm curious what you guys are feeling in Park County versus what I've been hearing in Gallatin County. So shoot me an email with those if you'd like. I think another good thing, and it's so hard to get into the good habit of that, but calling 5 to 10 donors a week. People are craving these kinds of conversations. And I think it's important to know too that people are on FaceTime, they're on Zoom, they're on, all sorts of different ways. And so try to make that face-to-face conversation, even though you're trying to call them on the phone. And then the last thing I would encourage you guys to do before your July 1st kickoff is really segment your donors. I think that you'll have the most success if you can dive into your database, you can look at who's given to you and kind of put them into different little segment piles and communicate a little bit different to each one. I always like to end with the truth of the matter, but this quote really resonates. So FEAR has 2 meanings: forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. The choice is yours. So we know that we really don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what's happening really with, when we're going to be opening the state and, expanding our services. And so I want you guys to just breathe, try not to panic, and remember that it takes a lot to change someone's passion. They give to causes that matter to them, and continue to stay connected and get people engaged, because research has shown that the people that stop communicating are the ones that aren't here. And so we need you guys here, so keep up that good work. Any questions?
Great. Thank you, Christel. We're going to do a little silent clapping for you. So we have about 5 more minutes in our scheduled time, and feel free to put a question in the chat box. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I don't know. I know that most of the Community Foundation webinars and calls that we've had to date have been on a different platform. So for those of you who are new to Zoom, just at the bottom of your screen there is where there's a chat box is right down there.
Christel, this is Gavin. Thank you for this. This was really, really great. And I was struck over your myth busts that these are not necessarily always COVID related. And I think that's a big take home for folks, is that these are fundraising myths that span health crises and economic crises. And so I'm really grateful that you were able to package this within COVID, knowing that are pretty broad things that are relevant in fundraising and at all times. So I really appreciate this and your excitement for fundraising, because it is so important that people have a positive outlook on this stuff, and thought you did really great. So thank you.
Thank you for that compliment.
Great. And I see a question in the chat box. How much will this cost to participate, from Megan? So the Give a Hoot campaign is entirely free of charge for organizations to participate. We have some very generous donors who have made donations that cover the cost of administering it. So it does take some time. I don't want to lie about that. It definitely takes an investment of time. You do need to read the guidelines, sign the registration form on the back of the guidelines, and get your organization registered on the giveahoot.org website. But there is no fee to participate in this.
We'll do you one better. We even pay for all of the credit card processing fees. So all of your credit card gifts that come through the Give a Hoot website, the Community Foundation covers those costs as well.
Thank you for pointing that out also, Gavin. And then an additional question, 2 questions actually. What's the benefit of a month rather than a couple of days? The way I explain it to people is we just roll a little bit differently here in Park County, and people are super busy over the summer, and it can, it takes a while to get the news out and give people a chance to be involved. So that's why we decided to do it as a month-long campaign, and we found that very successful last year, so we wanted to continue that again. And then the other question, Gavin, I'll let you answer this. Who do we think is the audience for this fundraising effort?
I think the audience is twofold. The first would be your existing donors and folks that you want to incentivize and find alignment with that currently support you. And then the second, and that's going to be on a scale of annual size donors or membership size donors to major donors and beyond. And then I think the second audience is going to be new folks that don't know who you are yet, and might find out about the great work that you're doing through the Give a Hoot campaign. The messaging will be a little bit different, and so you'll have to kind of segment, as Christel was saying, to try to meet your donors where they're at, and find alignment there. But I would say those are the two primary audiences that you'll be looking at. We've found that people are donating all over the country, so it's not necessarily a geographic segment by any means. I encourage everybody to reach out past just your local Park County donors and try to get folks involved from all over the country, because folks have connections to Park County in ways that you would never realize or know, and I've seen that in a ton of different situations. Maybe they visited here on vacation when they were a kid, and their vision of the Yellowstone River and fly fishing with their parents as a child evokes emotion, and they want to work to protect the Yellowstone or whatever it may be. There's a million different examples, but new donors and existing donors, I think, are the primary audience, Megan, that you'll be wanting to think through. Christel, do you have any other thoughts there, Barb?
I was going to comment on the benefit of a month versus a couple of days. I think with, knowing this doesn't start till July 1st, I believe is what you said, it allows you to try a couple different avenues, like doing more Facebook, social media, maybe a live event. And that allows you to kind of break those up into a 4-week period. And by doing this, you can try different new things, but you can also see what works best with your audiences. And then down in the future, you can come back to what worked better when you have other campaigns.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Christel. Just to say, the actual campaign starts on July 8th. I just say July 1st because I'm a little bit of a nervous Nelly, and I like to have things set up ahead of time. And also that week between the 1st and the 8th, this 4th of July, there's a lot going on. Two last things I wanted to share about our experience with donors. We've also found an incredible range in what people were able to give and chose to give. We had some people who donated, $20,000, $40,000, $60,000. We had people who donated $20 and divided it amongst 5 different organizations. So this is a campaign that appeals both to the very deep-pocketed donor and the very deep-hearted donor who maybe doesn't have a huge bank account but still wants to spread their donations around. We are at times, so the one other thing I just want to say in closing is, in speaking of who are the targeted donors and ways to reach out to them, one of the things that we are planning to do this year is we set a target goal to see if we could get 2,020 donors, 2,020 individual donations. Last year we had, I think, 1,765, something like that, which 1,765, which for a county that has less than 17,000 people in the county was a pretty impressive percentage. But we're like, it's 2020, let's mix it up a little bit. So we do have that goal, and we're really trying to get the word out there that the important thing, particularly during this challenging time, is not necessarily the amount that you can donate, but showing your concern and your support for our existing nonprofits. And that's going to be a lot of the messaging that we're going to be rolling out as a community foundation. And we invite you and encourage you to use make use of our messaging and amplify it for the organizations that you are fundraising for. Well, thank you everyone for your time. We are at our 45-minute speed training ending time. So unless we have any last questions for Christel, let's all give her a big silent round of applause. Christel, thank you so much for your time and coming over across the pass virtually to be part of our webinar. And thank you to everyone who attended today. Feel free to, thank you, Christel, for offering your contact information. And of course, everyone is always welcome to reach out to myself or Gavin for follow-up questions. And I encourage you to visit the giveahoot.org website and click on the nonprofit toolkit, because we have a lot of tools and resources there for you to make use of.